before diving into the back half of this talk and actually discussing Dark Souls, I want to mention two orienting points that build a bridge between aesthetic categories and game studies as they currently exist. And this is to keep you from having to refer back to these works constantly, because they really inform the kind of backbone of what I'm talking about here. So the first is Shira Chess's concept of the designed identity. In her Ready Player 2, Chess builds on the work of Karli Kasurik in this particular section I want to talk about. And it takes it further into an analysis of the ideals of designers themselves and how they understand women within the framework of the consumer. So for chess, designed, not to speak for you, but to speak designed identity is a hybrid outcome of industry conventions, textual constructs, and audience placements in the design and structure of video games. That's kind of one big point for me. My second oriented point is the Marxist critic C.L.R. James's Beyond a Boundary, his book on sport and cricket. Originally published in 1963, the book provides a structural critique of colonial life and the role of sport within that. And by the way, if you're a game studies scholar, you're interested in game studies, this is a huge missing piece of the way that we talk about games. There's an alternate world in which we don't look at Kawa, we don't look at Huizinga, and we look at C.L.R. James's understanding of sport from the 1920s until the 1960s, and it completely changes our field. It is a radical book that we are missing by not reading more often, or reading at all. In discussing his home island of Trinidad, James explains that his social position and the opportunities afforded him were majorly dependent on how he performed at cricket. It was a socially determinative force. He explains, this is long, sorry, but in an article welcoming the West Indies team of 1957, E.W. Swanton has written in the Daily Telegraph that in the West Indies, the cricket ethic has shaped not only the cricketers, but social life as a whole. It is an understatement. There's a whole generation of us, and perhaps two generations, who have been formed not only in social attitudes, but in our most intimate personal lives. In fact, there more than anywhere else. The social attitudes we could some degree alter if we wished. For the inner self, the die was cast. And this is a 300-page book that's exactly about describing this and how games and coloniality function. It's very, very good. So it's from these positions that I want to talk about aesthetic categories and their relationship to Dark Souls. And it begins with a question. What is Dark Souls? We can start with the minimum object, the game itself. It's an action RPG with a focus on trial and error and personal skill building, borrowing heavily from the design principles of roguelikes as well as traditional adventure games like The Legend of Zelda. It has a large interconnected world that rewards exploration and the attention to detail. It has a wide array of weapons to use and different stats that can be improved with collected experience points, called souls. I'm just going to enumerate all the different things here. It has an obscure narrative that is barely connected to the player or communicated to the player. Additionally, it has a multiplayer component that both allows for cooperation and for invasions that allow players to enter each other's games and hurt or hinder their progress, or sometimes help them, but mostly hurt. This is all contained within a set of mechanics that center on player failure in the form of death. Upon dying, player progress is reset to the last bonfire they touch, kind of a checkpoint. They drop all of their souls, and they make it back to the place where they died before dying again, and they can retrieve them. There's risk, and there's reward. So pulling back one level, Dark Souls is a game of lineage. It's directed by Hidetaka Miyazaki From Software. It's a conceptual sequel to Demon Souls here on the left. It has a similar fidelity to Death as a mechanic. It lifts much of its combat mechanics, movement modes, and exploration designs. Even the Kingsfield games going all the way back to PlayStation 1. These design concepts strike... To pull back one more level, even back, continuing to think about what is Dark Souls, it's worth considering the critical and promotional language, to use the phrase in the game. In their You Died on the right, Keza McDonald and Jason Killingsworth note that there was a strong critical community that developed in the wake of Demon Souls in anticipation of Dark Souls. And they kind of discuss in the book this thing called the Chain of Pain, which were all of these, it's an email chain of all the game journalists who were reviewing Dark Souls at the time, and they didn't have any help, right? There was no way to figure it out, so they had to talk to each other to get through the game. And many people didn't finish it before the review period, and I think they had 2 or 3 weeks, which is quite long for the review period. So additionally, the PC release of the game, named the Prepare to Die edition, leaned heavily into the discourse that surrounded the game as a hardcore experience that punished bad play and rewarded tactical, smart choices made by the most excellent of gamers. Not me. And just imagine that I found good things for this up here. And then finally, one level higher, we have that discourse itself about hardcoreness. A set of discussions that ran through comment threads, Reddit threads, forums, and think pieces that all asserted that Dark Souls was the onset of a new set of mechanics and indeed a new kind of video game experience. Dark Souls apparently broke so much with the games that came before it that it became a signifier for the very act of breaking from tradition. X is the Dark Souls of Y became a headline that quickly transformed into like a parody meme. So this is Dark Souls. All these different things I just described is Dark Souls. It's the object. I've claimed in previous work, a little self-promo, that it's critical to understand video games as assemblages that extend out, sometimes far out, from where we traditionally delimit them. I was rarely investing in Bills and Atari here at Foucault. All these different layers press on and influence the others, and where we'd excavate them all, we would have the work of a solid cultural studies project that understands consumption and production within a particular circuit of culture. I want to stop just short of that. An argument said that the best way of understanding Dark Souls as a phenomenon is through the methodology of the aesthetic category. The aesthetic categories that Sayanai identified in her book were about creating subjects under capitalism, as I said before. I want to argue that the individual games or movements within games can create their own subjectivizing tendencies that accrue into aesthetic categories. I agree with the critics, journalists, and fans. Dark Souls is a sea change in video games. It's a big move. The transformation is affected through the production of an aesthetic category. So the crucial difference between what I'm suggesting here and something like genre study is that I argue that the aesthetic category has a dual function that looks out to a macro level and into a micro level. The macro is the transformation of a broad set of mechanics and modes of interaction, the impulse to call things the Dark Souls of whatever, and the micro is the set of practices that individuals have gone through in order to properly operate the game. In Chess's language, the micro level is the designed identity that is produced for the consumer of a game to fit within. And the macro level I'm talking about actually lines up a lot with what Shiro was saying about how casual games are transforming in a broad set of practices, and even things like loot boxes, which are a big console problem right now, the canary in the coal mine were casual games as well. So that's part of the production of a set of aesthetics and a set of economic relationships that is part of the aesthetic category. So the reason I find aesthetic categories to be helpful is they give us a way of understanding the circulation of ideas and concepts within a broader set of relations. While Nye is concerned with capitalism's big effects, I find the aesthetic categories to be just as helpful for understanding a broad intersectional set of relations that are both augmented and affected by one another. When James discusses the Trinidadian relationship to cricket, he's describing an aesthetic category of cricket, which operates in the micro as a game that structures life and the day, and in the macro as a relationship of Trinidad to the colonial government, to economics, to gender relations, to racist parsing of society, and access to education. All of those have their own chapters. So I'll end by suggesting that aesthetic categories are a way of uniting what I see as separate threads within the analysis of games, things that don't really talk to one another. It's an omnibus method that allows us to create a broader, more operable schematic from cultural studies, material history, platform studies, and the actual practices of game design and development. The aesthetic category gives us purchase on descriptive language for what constitutes a horizon for a particular gaming public and their practices. And I think that it's only through this analysis of the interlock distribution of the sensible that we can both understand and intervene in communities that tend toward toxicity and exclusionary behavior. The only way we can really work through that hardcoreness and the operable effects that Shiro was talking about, I think, is to talk about that broad set of social relations. Thanks.
So this is the very first layer of the study. So in this one, I use autoethnography to read my in-game decisions and rationale. I also study other players, and I study the online communities as well. But the reason I use autoethnography is I really wanted to understand my unique and personal factors that influence my experience. I built everything into Twine, so it's an interactive experience. So readers, aka players, can go more in depth in certain themes than others. They can skip things. They could read, focus on the passages that are more research driven, or they could skip those over altogether and read more of the biographical information. And I also incorporate images, sounds, video. I changed the design of it to create an experience that's a bit more immersive than what you typically see in a dissertation chapter, right? So the game series that I analyze is The Walking Dead. Has anyone played it, or you at least know it? Yeah. So it's this one's created by Telltale. It's based off of the graphic novels, and the game series tells the story of really about Clementine, this little girl that you see here, as she comes to age during a zombie apocalypse. In the very first game, you play as Lee Everett, who is a history professor turned fugitive. He finds Clementine and takes her under his wing and really spends a lot of the game struggling to teach her how to survive in a world that's full of monsters. So spoiler alert, like major spoiler alert. So say la 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 if you don't want to hear. But at the end of the first game, Lee is dead. And so Clementine's left to face the world alone. So one thing that's really neat is the choices that you make in the first game carry over into the second and then the third. So you can really see what how your parenting in the first game influences Clementine in the second and third. And then of course you get to play as her, so then you can influence her even further by playing through her. So not only do your choices impact who Clementine becomes and who Lee is, but it influences your relationships with other characters. So characters will either trust you or not trust you. They will be friendly or they'll be distant, based off of how you act towards them, based off of what you say and how you say it. And in games, the second and the third season, the ending changes based off of your choices. And I have to say that the choices are just heart-wrenching. Some of them are just heart-wrenching and epically ambiguous. So you have to decide things like, who do you save in a zombie attack? 2 people are going to die. Who do you save? Who do you give food to? Everyone's starving and you only have 4 pieces of food. Who deserves to eat? Who deserves to starve? And also, what do you do when a little boy's been bitten by a zombie? Do you kill him because you're worried that he may turn and hurt Clementine or someone else in your group? Do you let him turn, or do you ask his parents to kill him? Like, what's the best approach there, right? So these are really hard decisions. As I play through the game, I'm really inflecting on how my intersecting identities and personal experiences and interpretations influence the game, but also how the game works on me, right? So how the game's narrative and mechanics influence how I see myself, how I see the world, how I see the game. And I analyze these experiences through intersectional feminist understandings of media representation and feminist science and technology studies work, which examines who has access to technology, and then what are the various gatekeepers that limit or permit this access. And this furthers previous examinations of identification as play as complex and in flux. So I look at how I shift in and out of these various identifications as I play. So sometimes I really focus on Lee. I focus on his personality, his values. So sometimes I'm hyper aware of the fact that I am a black man in the South, right? And sometimes I focus on my values and beliefs. And then other times I'm really just using Lee as a tool to achieve my physical world needs. I'm playing and I'm like, oh my gosh, I have to get to a save point quickly. I have to move fast because my husband's coming home with my child, right? So I shift in and out of these periods of identification. So I use autoethnography to analyze this, which is a systematic approach to examining personal experience as a means to understanding the intersections between identity and the larger social, political, and cultural influences. So I'm serving a dual role here, right? I'm researcher and I'm researched, I'm observer and I'm participant. And so in the study, I document my interactions and choices, I notate my interpretations, distractions, limiting agents, and any sort of evoked memories that surround my play. And then, of course, I analyze everything through a theoretical and informed lens. So I chose to put everything on Twine, one, because of its accessibility. So it's a free program online. It's fairly easy to use. But also I wanted to align myself with those who have used it to create socially and personally transformative interactive experiences beyond what you see in AAA titles. So Anna Anthropy, who is a do-it-yourself game maker and critic, wrote about how she wanted to create games outside of the single culture of the games industry, and specifically she wanted to create games that were about something different than men shooting men in the face. Because let's face it, there was a solid 10 years there in which that's all we had to play, right? Mostly first-person shooters. So one of the games that she made that was neither about men nor shooting is Queers in Love at the End of the World, and this was the game that she created on Twine. So when you start the game, you have 10 seconds. And you're there, you're with your partner, the world is going to end. What do? Do you kiss her? Do you hold her? Do you take her hand? Do you tell her? So you can make a choice, and then obviously that is going to open up other choices. It's going to describe what happens. There may be dialogue and various experiences. But no matter what you do, I mean, the world is still going to end in 10 seconds. You cannot stop the world from ending. But this game isn't really about stopping the world from ending, right? It's not about changing the outcome. It's about having a unique experience, right? So no matter what happens, your experience is going to be different, right? So game maker and critic Maddie Bryce, in her analysis of Queers at the End of the World, and she kind of generally talks about text-based twine games here, but she says it's not about the outcome of choices you have, but rather how the game aims to train your perception and get you to understand the architecture of your thoughts and the reason why you chose the things you do. So this was really key for me in designing my game. So I couldn't give the readers total agency because this is a nonfiction experience, right? I can't let them change my past. I can't let them change how I interpret the game. But what I can do is create interactive elements with the hope that I'm training their perception, that I'm encouraging self-reflection, right? So one of the things that I talk about in the beginning of my game is that I need to unlearn my privilege, right? And that's one thing that I can try and get my readers to do as well. Just be aware of whatever privileges they have, whatever experiences they've had, how their identities inform how they play or how they interpret my play, so on and so forth. So now, I'm just going to read you a couple passages from my autoethnography, just so you can kind of get a sense of what I was doing here. And I don't have sound hooked up, but that's okay because it might be distracting anyway. So I'm just going to skip to the beginning. So I click play, and title card appears. The game series adapts to the choices you make. The story is tailored by how you play. This isn't the first time I played the game. During my first playthrough, I was terrified even small decisions would have a butterfly effect, and replayed scenes over and over until they were what I considered to be perfect. Achieving the perfect play satiates my perfectionist thirst. If only I could rewind and replay my own life. When I lay in bed feeding my son with the curtains drawn and the house quiet, I ruminate on what I would rewind. I try to divert my thoughts, to practice mindfulness and focus on the hum of the fan and the soft snores from my son as he suckles. To only feel the love pouring out as his warm body snuggles against mine. But the destructive what-ifs keep creeping in. My chest starts to feel tight, my muscles go tense. A mother's brain physically changes during pregnancy and continues for 2 years after childbirth, reducing their gray matter and increasing empathy, anxiety, and interpersonal communication. While fathers and adoptive parents' brains have the potential to change somewhat as a result of consistent attentive care, there are certain changes, such as the reduction of gray matter in areas of the brain responsible for social cognition, that are unique to biological mothers. While the effects of this are largely unknown, research noted a correlation between pronounced brain changes and higher emotional attachment. Therefore, they hypothesized that it aids women in their transition to becoming mothers. The brain changes to increase a mother's ability to recognize the needs of her infant, to recognize social threats, or to promote mother-infant bonding. I'm told that my incessant worries and heightened emotions are normal to new parents. It means you're a good mother, a doctor said, as she confided about her own irrational fears. I write a letter to my children every time I'm about to go on a flight, just in case. The last letter was 2 pages long. I think of other mothers in my life and their burdensome worry. I know my mother-in-law's cyclical obsessions, which drives her son mad, and my own mother's deep-rooted fear that I would be snatched or run over as a child. "Don't go near the street," she would yell. She told me a tale of a little girl who got her head chopped off because she opened the door to a strange man while she was home alone. Her fears became ingrained in my behavior and thoughts. My mom believes that passing down anxiety generationally is a necessity. That's what keeps you safe. But I had nightmares as a child of a bearded man stealing me away from my home. When I would go 2 houses down to visit a childhood friend, I would run. A car would pass and I ran faster, body tense, my heart pounding in my ears. The pounding fades. There is medication if you feel your anxiety is a barrier to your life, my doctor casually mentions. I immediately shake my head no, a quick end to the conversation, and we move on. I return to playing. The first shot fades up, a Dutch angle of a city skyline. The sky is bright and blue, but the diagonal lines of the gray skyscrapers, half consumed by fog, make me uneasy. It's a reflection of one of the most notable themes of the series, the struggle to maintain hope and survive in a world of dark tragedy and despair. Words appear, a new day, an episode appropriately named. This beginning marks the start of a new world and a new life for our main character, Lee Everett. It's also a new world for me. Not one filled with zombies and despair, but the beginning of something wondrous and scary, a world of motherhood. I am replaying the game series, which explores parenting through difficult times and includes themes of sacrifice, hope, fear, secrecy, and forgiveness, to contemplate and explore my relationship and experience of motherhood, in hope that my play will enlighten and heal, and my subsequent autoethnographic reflections may aid others who are adapting to having been reborn. Skipping over the autoethnography section, a patrol car is driving from a city. The camera cuts to a close-up of the black hand in cuffs. I think of Philando Castile, an unarmed black man who was unlawfully murdered by police just 2 days ago. But mostly I think about his mother. She appeared on CNN mere hours after his murder, poised but angry, as she recalled the last moments with her son. A conversation between her children about the fear of carrying a registered firearm, Philando leaving to get his hair done. Black in the wrong place, she says. I think of the mothers of all black boys and the fear they must carry every day. I think of how we perceive black boys to be older than what they actually are, and are less likely to stop for them at crosswalks. Black men historically have been represented and perceived by white folks as being aggressive criminals. This is evident in video games, which portray them primarily as gangsters or athletes, and could contribute to white officers seeing them as demonic and like Hulk Hogan. I think of the fact that because I'm a white middle-class woman with considerable privilege, it is extremely difficult to write about the experiences of people of color. So because of time, I have to stop there. So this study has some limitations, right? So one, it was difficult for me to disclose personal information, right? I'm not used to doing that in this type of setting. Let me see if that works. You know, work with me. Yeah, something, okay, there we go, cool. My computer is freaking out. Anyway, so it was hard for me to disclose personal information, right? I also had to merge together two styles of writing, research and creative, and I had not done creative writing in quite some time. So I actually had to, you know, as a doctoral student, we read mostly nonfiction academic text, right? So I actually had to take some time and read some fiction again and brush up on that, right? And that's something I'm still working on, right? Really kind of fine-tuning my style. And I also had to learn some new technical skills, right? To make Twine do what I wanted it to do. And it took quite a bit of trial and error. And also, I had to negotiate the projection of a non-traditional dissertation chapter with my committee, who, by the way, I love my committee. I totally lucked out. I'm not just saying that because Nick is my co-chair. But they've been wholly supportive of this since day one. But you know, we've had conversations about this, that they're not unaffected by the Academy's strict traditions surrounding dissertation writing. But you know, despite all these limitations, I found this to be a worthy experiment. So with so many of us go into academia because we want to create change, right? We want to either disperse knowledge or bring about social change, right? But very rarely are our voices heard outside of the ivory tower. And in particular dissertations, like who reads your dissertation other than your committee? Am I right? So like, I've sent things to my mom, and my mom's like, I can't read this, Christina. You sound very smart. I am so proud of you. but this is gibberish. So even my mom will read it. So in dissertations, they end up sitting in like untapped databases, in dusty old filing cabinets, right? And they're just not read. So this was really my attempt of kind of breaking open the dissertation process in just a small baby step sort of way, to make this work more accessible and public to people that I write with and about. So it's my hope that moving forward, it's going to make it easier for future students and future academics to redefine what it means to dissertate. So, thank you.
What was that? Oh, yeah. Can't remember ever. Oh, that one. Yeah. All right. Can everyone hear me in the back? Okay, it's probably necessary. Hi, my name is Joel. I'll be discussing a microethology of Minecraft mobile play, which has been currently reported on in New Media and Society, and an article co-authored with Nick Taylor, whom I owe a great deal of thanks to, and for the partnership and enthusiasm in this project. I would like to begin by framing this study around the notions of apparatuses and play. Following Karen Barad, this study sees apparatuses as material reconfigurings of the world that iteratively reconfigure space-time matter as part of the ongoing dynamism of becoming, and we further situate play, particularly video game play, in terms described by Seth Giddings as occurring and being generated by players' own versions of reality within the everyday. So in the following slides, I'll detail a study of Minecraft play that pays attention to how players generate these versions of reality as co-configured with the various components drawn into the gaming apparatus, particularly those involving touchscreen interfaces and mobile devices. First, some background for those of you unfamiliar. Minecraft is a sandbox game released in 2011 by Mojang, which allows players to explore block-like algorithmically generated game worlds and to play in two modes called creative or survival. The game has also garnered a wide range of user-generated modifications, online forums and communities, numerous streaming and YouTube channels and personalities, as well as quite a lot of merchandising. In short, Minecraft is a highly variable game with a plurality of media and players associated with it. And perhaps because Minecraft play can take so many forms, a good deal of research about Minecraft has been concerned with what Minecraft is and what its applicability is. And this is exemplified perhaps by Nate Gerald's collection of essays, Understanding Minecraft. For example, some researchers have characterized Minecraft play differently as a masculine constitution of subjectivity, or even producing a very queer form of nature, while others have also remarked upon the pedagogical applications, such as use for online class-based rooms, teaching distributed digital literacies, and even computer coding skills. Just Google Minecraft computer coding camps for kids, and you'll get quite a lot of hits. Actually, there's one in Raleigh called Youth Digital, I believe. However, other studies have been less concerned with understanding what Minecraft is, and instead with how Minecraft play is performed and situated in players' lives. For example, through ethnography, Trek 2014 and Desuane et al. 2015 have examined how pre-adolescents played Minecraft, how they talked about Minecraft, watched others play Minecraft, and so forth, as well as how those activities occurred throughout a variety of spaces: formal education spaces, their social spaces, online spaces, and even in different rooms when someone's home. Further, Hollett and Errett's 2015 study observed how the physical and virtual spaces frequently can interrupt one another in a two-way flow through the study of a single player, a 12-year-old cancer patient who was learning how to play Minecraft on an Xbox during an extended stay in a hospital. And that's the picture that you can see there on the right. That's a picture of their play space. There were moments that they described in their study in which the beeping of the heart monitor, when the tag fell off of it just flatlining, that suddenly they were, oh yeah, that's right, I'm connected here in a hospital. Yeah, very fun. One thing we found lacking in a lot of research about Minecraft, however, was an examination of the handheld mobile version called Minecraft Pocket Edition, which was released within a year of Minecraft for PCs. While the Desuane et al. Study certainly observed participants playing on mobile devices, they noted that the mobile Minecraft play was part of a distribution of Minecraft play. A player might play it on their PC at home, and then when it's bedtime, they go up to their room and play on their mobile devices, for example. Play itself, particularly how it was performed in these spaces through these varying devices, was not so much a focus. So in our study through microethology, we therefore wish to examine more closely what the coordination of play is with a gaming apparatus, whether that's a stationary or mobile device. And we think it is important to diffractively examine Minecraft play on mobile and stationary apparatuses because of the histories of gaming consoles and computing and so forth, as detailed by Catherine Hale's History of the Birth of Cybernetics. Early computer and gaming interfaces featured seemingly clear cuts between inputs, outputs, in accordance with a cybernetic feedback model that place boundaries between humans and non-human components. However, Barat's notion of the apparatus, which privileges discursive interactivity, instead of frames the various entangled components and felt experiences that meet through interfacing as co-configuring the gamic performances themselves. In other words, through the apparatus, we don't necessarily need to separate various sights, smells, senses, practices, and idiosyncrasies of gameplay experience. And in our study, we feel this is particularly evident in mobile gaming apparatuses. We were particularly interested in how this notion may be apparent when the input and output components are blurred and almost conjoined on a touchscreen interface on a mobile device. And we also further recognize that this certainly overlays with developmental and HCI research about touchscreen usage, particularly in children, as is the common notion that kids seem to adapt to using and learn to use touchscreen devices pretty quickly. And while we weren't necessarily concerned with the same exact questions, nor in any way really prepared to answer them, they certainly were present in our minds throughout the study and can be touched upon later. So our study, we were mainly concerned with asking the questions. First, how is Minecraft Pocket Edition play inhabited and performed? And second, in these performances, what competencies are co-configured with the cybernetic circuit of the touchscreen, the players, their hands, the play spaces, and so forth? There we go. And in doing so, our study employed Seth Giddings' microethology, which is attuned to observing events in order to observe the dynamic between the events in play. In terms of observing video game play, this involves attention to the hardware and the software of the games as agents themselves alongside the players themselves. And as demonstrated in the 4 pictures to the right from Giddings' 2014 Game Worlds book, this also involves observation from multiple vantage points, somewhat simultaneously at times, in order to attend to these various agents and components in play. So through snowball sampling methods and parent networks, we recruited 11 participants of varying ages, divided into about 5 groups for observations. These groups were observed, 3 groups were observed playing Minecraft Pocket Edition, quote unquote, as they normally do. Group B played exclusively on a PlayStation 4, as well as 1 short session on mobile device with me, and Group D was also observed playing exclusively on PC. We'll note that all of our participants were male, and this is in no way representative of gender identities of Minecraft players at large. It perhaps does reflect how these young player networks are maybe configured along gendered lines, but there's a lot more that we can talk about towards the end about that. Observations were also documented with multi-directional audio-video footage that attended to the bodies in particular play space, as well as screen recording in-game. So this is an example of what this can look like when syncing videos using the software ELAN, which is free for usage. So we'll first discuss participants playing on stationary apparatuses in an effort to perform a direct diffractive reading amongst these apparatuses. So first I'll talk about Group B, which involved participant JJ, we'll call him, playing on as I mentioned before, a PS4 on a network seed shared with a handful of his longtime friends who regularly play together through the PS4 network, whether Minecraft or any other handful of games that they're rotating through. In this play space, JJ sat crouched on a chair, as you can see there, in front of his television with his cat sitting between his feet. His cat is all black, so it's a little hard, but that's where the red circle is. Doesn't look very comfortable. He insists, however, that this is his cat's favorite thing to do. Anytime he's playing games, his cat will meow at him until he'll pick her up and put him on the seat with him. And he did this essentially until he lost feeling in his feet, which took approximately 30 minutes. Yes. During the session, JJ revisited many of the creations of his within this world. He mined for materials, and he mostly chit-chatted with his friends over the network, all of whom seemed to keep to themselves within this pretty expansive seed. Some of the creations within the seed were quite impressive and reflective of extensive hours of gameplay and research, many months of crafting. And one of the examples, as you see on the right, is a expansive underground network that allowed them to travel between the distant areas in the seed. Group D consisted of participants H and B, we'll call them, 2 longtime friends who were both 12 years old at the time of play, who had been introduced to Minecraft through Pocket Edition, but now appear to have graduated to playing exclusively on a PC. I actually brought tablets to the play session, and they refused. They wanted to play on their computers, which is fine. During the sessions with them, we at first played Skywars, a person-versus-person game played on a popular Minecraft server network. As you can see the image from the top. And then we later played in a seed of these called statues, which included large statues of Minecraft iconography. Some of the enemies that you see, some of the generic character, Steve. And this seed was one that was initially created by B and his younger sister, and that they had built over several months, and they would periodically add to, sometimes with H involved, sometimes not. And now we'll discuss the game sessions that involved examination of the mobile handheld apparatuses. First, Group A. This took place in a formal research space involving S and O, S being a 9-year-old, O being a 6-year-old. And sorry about my crude drawings, as you see over there. That was a typical arrangement of the game space, even though they tended to move around quite a good deal. Yes, O seemed to really like to sit on this particular stool and spin around while playing at the same time. I don't know how he didn't fall off. And I also like to characterize playing with these two as being in a game of tug of war, actually, because they always wanted me to play in the seat of their own making. And they also had difficulty kind of playing within the same seed at the same time, often. That's mainly because whoever creates and shares the seed effectively controls the game mode, accessibility, and more. So yeah, both were always trying to convince me to play in their seed. And they also tended to play in slightly different ways. S, the older brother, wanted to play in a somewhat structured game. He made a new seed at the outset of our session in creative mode, gave all 3 players their own bed and a chest with a bunch of resources, and then was going to switch to survival mode to give everyone a challenge. At the very hint of survival mode, O then left and went to one of his own seeds, since he mostly likes playing in creative mode. And he left, went to a seed where he commonly likes to build things and then destroy them. For example, at one point toward the end of the session, O spawned so many ghasts. These are gray, flying, tentacled creatures that you see on the picture on the right. He spawned so many ghasts that the entire seed lagged and crashed, much to his amusement, and his brother's amusement as well. Yeah. I think we told him, yes, you crashed Minecraft. Yeah, that's fine. Participants C and J were both 9-year-olds. These were longtime friends who commonly played together in a variety of ways, not just Minecraft. And they were both competitive one another, like the previous group. They both were always vying for control of the seed and the supposed rules that each claimed were essential to Minecraft. And frequently, if their avatars came into close contact with one another in the seed, they devolved into slap fights of sorts, as you can see there on the right. I have audio of this session for later. Group E was the only intergenerational group that I had, and they insisted on playing on the same tablet, both of which were entirely unexpected to me. BB was 8 years old and would sit in front of his father and be the primary controller of the avatar, and also the kind of architect and designer of the seed that they'd been building materials in for some time, while his father would sit behind him and somewhat wrapped around him, and would frequently sub in to control the avatar, often to do more repetitive labor constructing his son's designs. So you can see there. BB also liked building elements from other media that he appreciated, such as the Harry Potter series. At the start of the session, his goal was to build Hagrid's hut, even including an NPC villager that he was going to call Hagrid. At the same time, these plans were also subject to changes on the whim, or to adapt the Minecraft realm to try to align with his imagination. For example, upon finishing Hagrid's hut and spawning a villager that he called Hagrid, Hagrid walked right out the door. Much to his surprise. He therefore decided to scrap the idea of having a door and just have a flat wall that his father then suggested meant that the hut was more of a cage. And lastly, JJ from Group B did begrudgingly agree to play on mobile with me for a short game session. We made a brand new seed in survival mode because he refuses to play in creative mode, and he proceeded to play in a manner that was pretty consistent with what he believed was the essential purpose of the game: first mine, then craft. After about 45 minutes of play, we quit, and he told me that it was the worst experience of his life, and he never wanted to play in that seed or on mobile again. Oops, yeah. So throughout our play sessions involving collaborative Minecraft play across stationary and mobile devices, we observed performative tendencies that we have termed momentary and monumentary play. And neither of these terms are intended to describe an entire play session or a participant's play style altogether. Rather, they're intended to kind of theorize and work through particular collaborative performances that we observed. So just to distinguish these, momentary play is play that we say involved disposable game worlds, oscillation between game modes, on-the-fly shifts in goals, and generally frenetic bodies. In short, play that seemed more concerned with the fleeting moment of play, the fleeting moment generated by play itself. And I feel this is best exemplified by the moment I described before of participant O crashing the server because he spawned so many ghasts. Monumentary play, we say, is play that involved hints of iterative gameplay sessions, durable game worlds, large focus on mining and crafting, as well as idle bodies at play. In short, play that seemed more concerned with the construction and manipulation of Minecraft space that extended beyond the play stations itself. And we feel this was almost best exemplified by JJ in a session with his friends, and a disciplined body sitting in front of his monitor with that cat between his feet for 30 whole minutes. And there certainly were numerous observations of monumentary performances across game sessions by the same players, often across both stationary and mobile devices, but we would like to emphasize that oftentimes momentary play seemed to be more biased towards the mobile apparatuses. And these biases towards monumentary play likely intersected with participants' varying expertises, as well as their attitudes about Minecraft expertises, what it meant to be a good Minecraft player or experienced Minecraft player. And indeed, the younger players had not quite developed computer literacy skills, even though they were competent at using mobile devices, so they certainly had some mobile computing skills. And we suggest that these modes of play and performances certainly interacted with these areas. And the play that play on Minecraft Pocket Edition seemed to bias towards the momentary play, especially for the younger players who predominantly played on Pocket Edition, suggest an agentive, collaborative, and idiosyncratic configuration of Minecraft play on and with the mobile apparatuses. And this is not necessarily to say that Minecraft mobile play is not at all concerned with monumentary performances, or that the touchscreen interfaces seem to force or guide a player towards playing in a momentary fashion. Indeed, generally anything you can do on the mobile version, you can do on the PC version or PlayStation version. Instead, we seem to suggest that mobile play may be socially embedded within the Minecraft expertises and competencies that are in tension with the digital literacies, the ages and developmental skills, and the goals and stakes that players have in their everyday lives. However, when this play is performed through the handheld mobile devices and touchscreen devices, which allows play to occur across spaces and times in a way that is more difficult on a PC or on a PlayStation or a stationary console, then perhaps Minecraft play itself is more concerned with just simply mining and crafting, more concerned with how Minecraft is and its players are entangled momentarily together. Thank you. So we have some selected references, and if you are quick with your camera, there's our QR code, which you can get to our published article. Thank you.
The important thing I want to point out before I start talking about the makerspace is the idea that synthetic subjectivation derives from and intervenes in an arrangement of material elements and embodied potentials. So it's really important to talk about these arrangements or assemblages in terms of various bodies, organic and technical, that come together in a relational or molecular way before there is a subject, before there is the categorization of a whole. So the subject then is a subject of the composition of these elements and potentials, these various bodies, and not some kind of abstractable human whole or organism. So the makerspace's overarching goal is to provide the resources, materials, and support for access to and literacies with emerging technologies. And part of that is offering workshops and events and hands-on instruction, as well as encouraging people to just come in and play around with different things and learn how to use them through hands-on experiences. So really what we can think about with this space is that it's kind of a technology in its own right for producing makers. And it's also important to ask what kinds of motivations people have for coming into the space. So some things that I've seen people come in for personal projects. I've seen a lot of D&D figures printed on our 3D printers in there. There's also people coming in for class projects to work on things. So there's actually several people in this room who have brought their classes into the makerspace for some instruction and project work. And then also there's some entrepreneurial projects that go on there. So we do have one makerspace user who for the past, I think, 6 months or more has been 3D printing pieces to assemble fidget spinners that he's selling on Amazon's marketplace. So there are these different motivations that are bringing people into the space. But really what Dr. Wiley and I are asking of the makerspace is not these kinds of like particular personal articulations of motivations, but more along the lines of what is motivating the subjectivation of the people who are coming into the makerspace and using the makerspace. So there is an encouragement of these playful practices in the makerspace, you know, being able to come in and just play around with stuff, and that's one mode of learning how to use things. It's just by picking it up, and even if you've never worked with this tool before or this technology before, you pick it up, you start working with it, you just play around with it. So there's an encouragement of these playful practices in the makerspace, and they're not necessarily game related, so this is a type of play that's a bit like children's play, in a sense that it's taking something like, you know, a bucket of Legos and building something without any instructions that are telling you what to build. So this photo here actually was part of a makerspace staff retreat that we did, and I can't remember the exact prompt, but we were supposed to build something with the Legos that was like something about ourselves. So that's me, dressed in all black and holding a baton. So I could either be like conducting an orchestra or like being a dictator giving a speech on a podium. The chain kind of maybe suggests something a little bit more violent, I don't know. But, so building something without any instructions telling you what to build. Sorry, Dr. Taylor, I know how much you love your Lego sets. So yeah, that's this kind of play that I'm talking about when I'm talking about makerspace play. So while we do actually have Legos in the makerspace, we also have a lot of other type of high-tech things like 3D printers and digital embroidery machines and 3D scanners and laser cutters and all this stuff that have a little bit more of a learning curve to them than learning how to snap blocks together. So the way that playing around to learn these things is framed is through the ideas of tinkering. So, you know, like I was talking about where you're just messing around with things in order to learn how they work or see what you can do with them. And then playfulness in that part of it, meaning that you don't really have a set idea yet of something that you're going to create as an end product. So you're much more focused on the process than you are on the product when you're tinkering, when you're playing around. But there are also, this is getting now into the hybridity of this. So in the title of this presentation is the hybrid logics of productivity and play in the makerspace. So what I'm really talking about here is not necessarily going to be these practices or these people or these subjects. It's the logics that are influencing subjectivations in the makerspace. And those logics, while they are oftentimes playful with this idea of tinkering around, they're also really influenced by other types of logic. So capitalism and entrepreneurship and then, of course, logics of the higher education institution itself. And one of the specific contexts where we can look at the ways that those logics are influencing subjectivations in the makerspace is Makeathon, which is an annual multi-day competition that's held during which student groups prototype a product to promote sustainability, either on campus or in Raleigh or maybe even on a larger scale. So it's a corporate sponsored event, you know, companies such as IBM, for example, grand prize is a 3D printer for each group member. I mean, that's pretty sweet. And then some of the prizes, the other prizes are also sponsored by these companies. So I think it was last year there was a prize for the best use of a specific IBM product in the group's prototype project. So the way that it works, day one, there's a sort of reception and team formation. Day two is the build day. This happens in D.H. Hill Library, in the makerspace, and in adjacent spaces. There this year there were a lot of participants, so we just needed the space for everybody to be able to work. So yeah, we sort of, not just in the makerspace, but taking over other library spaces as well. There were also mentors there from various departments and even from companies, and they kind of floated around on build day and helped the groups come up with ideas or think through some issues or even learn how to use a certain technology, which was the same for the makerspace staff members like me who were going around to the groups and seeing if there was anything they needed, if they needed help learning or figuring out how to use something so they could get something, a component for their project. And then the final day of Make-a-thon was the judging and the awarding of prizes. This year, there was the inclusion of this kind of, sort of like a tiebreaker, super judges. Super judge right here. So I didn't make a cape and wear it or anything like that, but I really felt special being a super judge. And the rubrics for these things, for the projects, were pretty much focused on, is this a creative technology that's going to promote sustainability, and is it feasible to go into production? Is it marketable, and things like that. So the logics that you can see at play in something like Make-a-thon, there's definitely an entrepreneurial logic. So there's a focus on, from the beginning, you're coming up with a product. So even in the competition, they're only expected to produce a prototype or a proof of concept even. It was still, this focus on coming up with and prototyping a specific product. And then, of course, again, like with the rubric and the judging, there was a focus on marketability. Is this going to be something that people would want to buy, or that a company would be willing to take on to mass produce or something like that? And then examples like the prize for the best use of IBM's technology, so the best use of an existing commercial product being part of that. And then there are these institutional and even state logics that are happening. So, the whole prompt is building this product to better serve the university or the city of Raleigh or something like that. But, of course, there is the element of creativeness and uniqueness to the product. What is something that they came up with that is more creative than some other group's technology, something that nobody's thought of before. So that's also a logic that's at play here. But really, what I'm going to do next is kind of talk about a very like a contrasting experience that I had in the makerspace that is attempting to kind of move away from these capitalist and institutional and state logics and try to see if there's if there's a different way of becoming a subject or becoming subjectivated in the makerspace. So, first of all, one idea for trying to rethink the way that these logics influence subjectivations in the makerspace is looking at things like glitches and failures to promote a rethinking of practices. So we actually do, when we're hosting classes or other things like that, there's something that we always tell people is that it's okay to fail because you learn something from those failures. And so when something fails, it's opening up new questions and possibilities, and it's really bringing attention to what can happen when something doesn't work the way that it's supposed to work, scare quotes. So glitches and failures are one place to kind of look for these ways of rethinking practices in the makerspace. But also, I really just wanted to try something out to see what happened. And I put together this experimental play session for myself where I was just trying to toy around with this idea of creative experimentation, and I just sort of walked around the makerspace and picked up some random things, and I had some of my own components in my bag, but I was trying not to fixate on anything and just kind of walk around and randomly pick things up and see what I could come up with. So I ended up with a whole bunch of stuff on this table, but what I ended up using were just a few of these components. So I had my own personal LilyPad MP3 player. A LilyPad is a little microcontroller that's specifically designed to be sewn into textiles and clothing. And I had the sewing machine out, and I had some scrap fabric. And then I also just had kind of randomly selected the pulse sensor as an input. I didn't know where I was going with any of it, so I just set up the circuit to test the components to make sure that the pulse sensor was working, the board was working, etc., and watch my pulse generate values in the Arduino interface's serial monitor, and then it graphed it to in the serial plotter of the Arduino interface. And I don't know why, but for some reason, watching those values and watching the plotter, it made me think of music. So I just found some code on an Internet Maker forum for my LilyPad MP3 player and went to a free music site where I downloaded this big package of just single notes from the instruments of a full orchestra. And I modified the code a little bit to trigger random MP3s, so this pool of one-note things that I had, my pulse would trigger them randomly. And then I just kind of sewed some things with conductive thread into a piece of cloth to make it, I don't know. I did all this like extraneous stuff. I actually pushed it up against my throat to get a better pulse reading, and so all these random notes were being triggered. You know, there was like a violin, a cello, a flute, just all these random triggered notes, you know, woodwinds, oboe, clarinet, name more, they were all there. And I tried to do some different things to see what would happen. I tried to hold my breath, like when I was a kid and my temper tantrum was holding my breath until I passed out. And then I tried to get up and do jumping jacks, and I was super self-conscious about that because the makerspace has an entire glass wall. So I was like kind of in a corner. We have a marker board, and I moved it, and I'm just like, okay, jumping jacks. But anyway, so like but really it didn't make too much difference, but what I started to hear was that it wasn't just random notes. It struck me as an orchestra tuning up, which I thought was just a really cool thing. But that was also the kind of end result of this experimentation, was that I had made sense of this in some way after it had all come together, after it had all happened. So there's just these different kinds of logics that were at play in the experimental play session. So, you know, there's these technical bodies like the LilyPad, the pulse sensor, a laptop that had the MP3s that was doing with the speakers and everything. And then, of course, it was compositional. So like I talked about in the beginning, we're talking about arrangements as the subject being a subject of the composition. So these various bodies, heart, hands, eyes, technics, sound waves, things like that. And then the experimental nature of it was just that the meaning of it was made post-session. So like I didn't have an idea of what I was going to create. I just, when it was already, you know, when things were happening, it just came together in my head like, oh, this is the meaning I'm making of this scenario. So the last thing I want to talk about real quick is just what all of this means for the maker movement and for maker practices. And really, it's about trying to rethink some of these practices and trying to encourage these different open, unruly subjectivities in the makerspace, along with, you know, the entrepreneurial, the institutional, those practices are still going to happen. They're still necessary for a lot of things that the university does. But to think about play and the hybrid logics that are behind this play in a different way that opens up the possibilities and stops placing limits on things. So trying not to say this is going to be this or that it can exist on a spectrum of things. And trying not to say that I have this specific thing in mind that I'm going to do, because maybe there's something new that will emerge if you're just playing around and then you tune up an orchestra with your throat. So thank you very much.